Can you understand the frustration, though, that Americans have about the situation at the border?
There are a variety of components to this. One is the fact that under the previous administration, they decimated a system that was designed to address immigration.
Yeah, just to be clear, under the former administration, apprehensions at the border were at a 20-year low. That was the so-called border czar, Vice President Kamala Harris, blaming Trump for the crisis at the southern border after Biden overturned all of Trump's policies that, in fact, had worked. The number of migrant encounters this fiscal year reaching an all-time high with 1 month left to go. Joining me right now is the New York Post columnist, Fox News contributor, and author of Laptop from Hell. Miranda Devine is here. Miranda, thanks very much for being here. And you broke this story wide open by going to the Westchester airport, that private airport, and you viewed for yourself these secret flights in the middle of the night where Joe Biden was directing migrants from the open border to be dropped off in Westchester. What do you think Kamala Harris is talking about?
Hi, Maria. Well, she's just trying to gaslight the American people and pretend that she hasn't been an abject failure as the border czar, to blame the Trump administration for the problems now when it was Joe Biden who ripped up all the very hard-won, well-thought-out border protections that the Trump administration put in place to achieve record low numbers, is just absurd. What a hide for her to call the governors of Texas and Florida inhumane and irresponsible and, a dereliction of duty. Those words are exactly how we should describe Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and their administration, because they have unleashed the gates of hell on this country. We know that there are, a couple of dozen at least known suspected terrorists who have come across the border. And, there are something like almost 1 million gotaways that have come across the border. God knows who those people are and where they are and what harm they might wreak on America.
That's right. We're looking at surveillance video where people got away. They came into this country and they are here. We don't know their intentions, but clearly they had no intention of getting apprehended. They just wanted to sneak in. And unfortunately, what you're saying is spot on, because it's been all politics. It's been, we hate Trump, so let's overturn everything Trump put in place. Yeah. They did that at the border. They also did that on foreign policy. I heard that you're not even allowed to mention the Abraham Accords. And by the way, this morning, 2 years after that historic Abraham Accords were signed, the UK Prime Minister has called them the greatest success story in the Middle East for a generation. And yet, Joe Biden wants to unwind that as well. But we have evidence of what's going on at the border. This morning, more buses full of illegal migrants pulled into New York City this morning. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is announcing a plan to open humanitarian emergency centers, he says, for the migrants that have been bused to New York. These pictures from the mayor's office show what these centers will look like, Miranda. So he's taking this on, I guess, and he's going to be putting the migrants in centers. After all, he does say that New York is a sanctuary city.
Well, he's quite cleverly, I guess, turned around what really is an embarrassment to him and to New York with these buses coming in. But, really, it's how many has it been? A few thousand, if that.
Yeah.
And yet, as you said, those migrant flights were coming into Westchester, and then there was an overflow in the Stewart International Airport. There were so many of them. And at one point, they were coming in almost every night. They have slowed down now, maybe because of some scrutiny. Who knows? They're not transparent. I've had an FOIA request in with the government for several months, no response. They don't want to talk about it. They lie about it. And this story about the flights, which are going not just to New York, but all over the country from the border, from both Arizona and Texas, is an untold story. And it's very difficult to tell the story, because the administration is covering it up and the rest of the media is really not curious, the left-wing media.
It's unbelievable. I want to switch gears and get your take on Hunter Biden. You've done such great reporting on that. And, of course, that's the subject of your book, A Laptop from Hell. Earlier this week, Democrats on the House Oversight Committee voted down the Hunter Biden probe and a Republican request for documents on the Biden family's business deals, Miranda. The Republicans are trying to get more confirmation on all of the influence peddling that Hunter Biden has done. And we've talked about this before. This is a Joe Biden story. He was selling access to the then sitting vice president for those years. Your thoughts on what took place in terms of that vote?
Look, I think it was a taste of what the Republicans are planning to do next year after the midterms, and I think it was a worthwhile exercise. Obviously, it was never going to get up because the Democrats control everything in Washington at the moment, but it was a worthwhile exercise for them to, trot out and practice their debating points, and they made some very good points. I think bringing it back to Joe Biden and the influence peddling, really. I mean, it's not about Hunter Biden, who's a sort of a sad character who had terrible drug addiction issues and was put into harm's way, really, by his father, by his father's insistence that he be the bag man for the family. So I don't think that it's Hunter Biden that they're wanting to go after. It's Joe Biden and what kind of compromises have been made.
Well, and, now we are at a situation where we are counting on the commander-in-chief to be tough on our number one adversary, China. How can he be tough if his family has taken in tens of millions of dollars from Chinese officials directed by the CCP? Miranda, let me turn your attention to what's happening right now on the left side of the screen. We are looking at a shot at Port Authority, and there is a fourth migrant bus that has just arrived. We should point out that these buses are typically about 50 people. But, Miranda, when you look at the number of encounters every day at the southern border, you're talking about 6,000 to 7,000 people a day showing up in Texas through the River Grande. And they're worried in New York and Chicago and Martha's Vineyard about 50 people showing up.
It's crazy. The latest figures are that 2.35 million migrants have crossed, illegal migrants have crossed the border in the last 10 months, plus, almost a million gotaways. And this is causing great havoc in those border communities. El Paso, you have illegal migrants sleeping on the streets. That's why the administration can't move fast enough to whisk them off to the rest of the country and hide them. But this is causing great, just surprise pressure on schools and hospitals and accommodation and homeless shelters. And I wouldn't wish going into a New York homeless shelter on my worst enemy. There are a lot of psychopaths in there and people who've been emptied out of the jails.
That's exactly right. By the way, here's a quote from one of my sources in El Paso. You mentioned El Paso. We are releasing migrants into the streets every day. We have intelligence that all these countries are releasing their prisoners, and all are coming to the United States. We have no access to their databases to properly screen these people. Basically, the same thing that Cuba did in the 1980s is happening again. This is truly extraordinary, Miranda. Happy to be talking about it with you as the rest of the media completely ignore this explosive story. Miranda, thanks very much for being here.